Okay, so mono overhead is hitting this Chandler LTD1. The EQ is in. It doesn't need phantom power. The phase, which I've checked, which we'll talk about, is already in. So I'm rolling off from 80 hertz down. Again, I have this rolled down to 390 hertz, and I'm cutting a lot of that. I'm going to not cut that as much. I don't know why that's so low. I think I bumped. Oh, that's why. Because it's right here. All right, so I'm only cutting 2 dB of that. And then I have this on 4K, and I'm rolling off about 1 dB of 4K. That just seems to help control that mic a little bit on the overhead. Control the cymbals a bit. We don't need all that low end for the overhead. We'll get that from the kick in the rooms. This other Chandler, this is the outside kick, the FET 47. It's hitting this. Oh, I'm sorry. To go back to the mono. So it goes from the Chandler to the distressor, which is over here. And the input, I keep about 5. Attack is at 3, release is at 2. I don't want it to do too much. Again, I'm not mixing it, so I don't want to go too extreme, but I think a little bit of compression, it's on 3-to-1 ratio. I think a little bit of compression is nice, makes it sound nice. I don't think, I'm going to assume that the engineer likes my settings, and since it's not too overblown, they can still mess with it if they need to. Okay, back to the outside kick, the FET 47 is hitting this Chandler LTD1. So with this mic, I'm really looking for the low end of the kick drum. So I'm not going to roll anything off on the bottom, and I'm boosting 60 hertz a bit, because that's where the kind of the lows are going to come from, the oomph. I'm cutting a little bit of 820 here, about 2 dB, and I'm rolling off at 3K also, because I'm trying to avoid much of any high end coming through there. If there's cymbal bleed, snare bleed, I'm trying to minimize that as much as possible. And that's it. So, and also any of the other high end, the inside kick mic will blend those two mics to taste. That is not hitting any other compressor or anything. That's just there. Snare. Snare is going in here, this API right here. And then it is hitting this this graphic EQ down here, API 560B graphic EQ. I'm boosting a bit of 4K and 2K to kind of bring out the snares. And I'm cutting some 500, some 250. And then I have all the low end rolled off. This has 36 and 63. I have that all the way down. 125, I'm going to bring that down to. So, because we don't, Snare's not really carrying those frequencies, so let's just try to minimize them as much as we can. Inside kick is hitting this API right here. I don't know why that phantom's on. That doesn't need to be on. It's got a pad on it. The kick drum gets pretty hot. Even when the input is all the way down, it's still pretty hot. So I'm padding it here. The phase is reversed. Again, I think I've checked this previously. So this should be all phase aligned. And if you don't know about phasing, if things are out of phase, they kind of cancel each other out. So kick drum mics, very important they're in phase or out of phase, whatever needs to happen. Because if they're in or out, depending on what it is, they could cancel each other out. Your drums could sound amazing in the room. If they're out of phase, then all your low end is gone, and that could be a reason why. So the inside kick mic is hitting this graphic EQ again of API 560. I'm cutting out all the 36. 63 is low. Again, I'm going for more attack on this, not so much low end sound, more attack. So I'm actually cutting out a lot of this low end 500, and I have 1K, 2K, and 4K all at 0, and then I'm cutting out all the real high-end stuff, 8K, 16. So it's a pretty straight-ahead thing, but again, I'm not really trying to get too much low-end out of this particular mic, because this is meant more for the attack. The toms, which are the 421s, are going through both these APIs. The floor tom is padded, and these are hitting these EQs. I don't even know what they are. I can't remember. But let's see. Yeah, kind of again basic things. I'm cutting some mid-range out of these. I boost a little bit of around to get some attack out of these, boosting some 2.5 or so, and then I'm trying to like minimize the cymbal bleed and things like that. So like 8K, 10K, things like that. I'm cutting that down a bit. Again, so hopefully more mixing on the. Hopefully less mixing on the other side of things. I'm trying to get it as close to, quote unquote mixed as I can for when I send these off. Because usually once I send these off, I never see them again. And you want your raw sounds without adding samples as good as possible, and hopefully less work for the engineer. The raw sound really great. Okay, next mic, inside, outside kick, top and bottom snare. Okay, bottom snare is going through the Day King here. No particular reason. It's, I don't know, that's what's open. So is the hi-hat, both going through these. They're not hitting anything else. No compression or anything like that. The rooms, the channelers, the Coles are hitting these channelers, TG2s. These are great mic pre's, especially with the Coles. So these are nice because they have the output control. So if there's a loud track, you can still hit them hard enough and bring the output down so you're not blasting out your DAW. But the important thing that I do in a small room like this is the Coles are going to the Transient Designer. So the Transient Designer can shape the room size, which is really important in a small room like this. It's hard for, obviously the bigger the room, the more it costs to build out. So I have a garage here that I've converted, and this is kind of what saves me. I can do huge rock tracks here or keep the room fairly small. So for this particular track, I'm going to actually make the room a little smaller, which I'm going to bring the attack. I'll just go through a basic tutorial here. If you want a big room size, you're going to add to the sustain, but also if you bring the attack back, that it helps. It helps, I guess, because there's no attack. It just helps increase the size, the perception of that the size is bigger also. So I'm not really hearing a huge room size on this track. So I'm going to bring the attack up almost to 0, and then the sustain is at about +5, +6, and that should give it a decent size without sounding too huge. And then again, we'll blend the room mics into where we want. Okay, so our last mic was the kind of a little effect mic that we put up next to the kick drum. So that is hitting the V78s. This is a tube preamp. And I'm bringing that also to the Transient Designer. So, like I said earlier, the rock track I just did, I had that mic, I had the attack up to about +5, and I had the sustain at about -4. So it was very short, and there was a lot of like attack or click to it, and I was blending that in to add some, and where the mic was placed over the kick drum. That kind of grabs the toms and the kick and the snare, and if you just blend that in a little bit, it adds attack to the snare, kick, and toms. So for this particular track, I'm actually going to take it out of the Transient Designer here, and I'm going to put it into this DBX 164, which is right here. And it has this over easy compression, and if you go here, if you go all the way, it's nuts. But we don't want that. We just want a little bit of compression, so the room, so that it kind of it blows that mic out a little bit. It's going to be kind of a nice lo-fi thing that we can blend in, and we'll solo that at some point so you can hear how it sounds. And that's all the mics. So at this point, I will go play. We'll check sounds back and forth, and then we'll start tracking the tune.
So we're going to begin by talking about coincident stereo pairs. Coincident means that both microphones meet at the same point. A lot of times this is going to be an XY technique, but there's a few others like ORTF, and I'll be explaining those shortly. So in order to get a coincident pair to work, we first have to identify the center line of the drum kit. And most people would assume that the center line of the drum kit is where the drum kit would be perceived from an audience's perspective if the drummer was playing on stage, like this. However, that's not the way our stereo speakers are going to pick up the image. What we really want is for the snare and the kick to lay in the phantom center of the playback. The center of that would actually be the imaginary diagonal line between the snare going off to the kick, which is actually going to angle off more like this. So if we take a look at the placement of our cardioid microphones here, you can see that they're not directly in front of the kit, but actually a little bit off to the side and aimed along an imaginary line. From here, in order to get the XY placement correct, we need to bisect that line with one microphone facing out this way and one microphone facing out that way. Once we've done that, we can then choose our polar patterns and figure out what kind of degree along this axis we want. So the microphones that I've chosen for this are two C414s. C414s are really good microphones for picking up drum overheads because they are multi-pattern, which means that you can select between cardioid, hypercardioid, omni, or figure 8. They're also good because there is an inline pad on the back of the mic, so if the drummer is a little heavy-handed, we can make some adjustments here. And also there is a high-pass filter roll-off that we can use if we want to get a little bit of the subtone out, which most of the time we probably want to do. So I'm going to click this over to 75 Hertz. There we go. And now we're going to lose a little bit of that sub rumble, which we're not really going to need. So okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the placement. Right now, this is a cardioid XY. Cardioid means that we are going to be picking up primarily from the front of the capsule in a fairly wide spherical pattern. Now, the placement in terms of where they are relative to the kit is along that center line, but raised up as if it were a front of the kit mic. What this capture is going to do is give us a pretty balanced image of all of the drums, but it's also going to incorporate a lot of the room sound in there as well. This is also not going to be the widest pickup. This is going to be a more concentric pickup, but it's still going to have a good amount of stereo spread to it. So now we're going to discuss a Blumline technique. Blumline is just a fancy way of saying an XY technique with a figure 8 pickup pattern. So I'm going to go over to my microphones here and switch it from cardioid to figure 8. There we go. And what we're going to hear is the center of the image drop away. So relatively speaking, the sides are going to come up, and ultimately what we're going to get is a slightly wider image. All right, Matt. All right, so now we're going to talk about a mid-side configuration. For a mid-side configuration, we're going to keep both mics in figure 8. And it's very important that they stay in figure 8 or this will not work. Mid-side uses a little bit of phase manipulation to turn one microphone into a room capture and the other microphone into a mono center capture. So we kind of get to have our cake and eat it too when we use this technique. Basically, this microphone, our mid, is going to be aimed straight at the snare. So we're going to get this very punchy, solid center. This microphone, the side microphone, is going to be tilted 90 degrees off axis, and it's going to pick up bidirectionally the front and the back, and allow this to act as a room capture, which we then blend up and underneath. So this is a great way of getting a really, really full sounding and wide sounding capture at the same time. Matt? All right, so this is another XY technique using the Blumline configuration, but this time instead of having it in front of the kit, we actually have it directly above the kit in parallel to the center line that we've drawn between the snare and the kick. So the idea here is we're going to get a very balanced and natural image of the kick. Unlike the front of kit, where you're going to get a slightly roomier snare and kick, you're going to get the same balance of room and tone directly into each microphone. So the other thing that's really cool about this kit is that because it is directly over the center line and you get the transient energy straight up from the kick and the snare, you end up actually getting a pretty solid mono center even when you end up having a slightly wider image. So there's definitely some advantages to doing this. Of course, the disadvantages is that it becomes harder to place some of the other mics around this particular setup. And that's something that you need to consider depending on how complex the kit setup is. All right, Matt, take it away.
All right.
So just to demonstrate the point of selecting your pickup patterns in a thoughtful way, what I've done here is switched the microphones into Omni. So what that's going to do is it's going to change the directionality of the pickup. Instead of getting the very direct sound from in front of the mic and the very direct sound from the back, we're actually going to get an even amount of sound from all around the microphone. What we're going to hear now that I've done this is that the actual width of the image playing back in the speakers is going to contract. It's going to become a little bit more central. And we're also going to hear a little bit more room tone show up. All right, Matt. So now we're going to talk about space pairs. Space pairs are a pretty common setup for drum overheads. You see this a lot in live setups. You see this a lot in studio. Now, this is the most common technique I've seen, which is an even distribution of space between the kick drum, and both microphones are facing their respective sides, aimed mostly at the outer cymbals and the toms and hi-hat. So there's a few things that are really good about this pickup. The first is that you can tend to get a lot of room in there and still get a good image of the drums. Another thing that's good about it is you tend to get a very wide image and you can really be selective about how you process, particularly the cymbals. It's a good pickup for the cymbals. The problem with this is that you tend to get a bit of a lopsided image. You can't really get the snare in the center, you can't really get the kick totally in the center, so it always ends up being a little bit lopsided and you end up relying on the close mics to balance your image more than maybe would be preferable. But it really comes down to what you're trying to do. All right, with all that said, Matt, you're up. So now I'm going to discuss another space pair technique. I call this the baseball mitts. I don't know what the technical name of this is, but that's just how I think of it. The idea is that the two space pairs are facing parallel to the floor, aimed straight down, and they are distributed evenly from the snare drum. So the idea here is that we're going to get a more concentric image, although it's still very difficult to get it from not being like a little lopsided, but it's usually a little easier to get it pretty close. We can also get a good amount of room, like most space pairs, and we're going to get a really good capture of the cymbals. All right, Matt, take it away. So this next space pair technique is one of my favorites. It's one that I find pretty much always gets a great sound. It's called the recorder man technique. And it works on the principle that both of the microphones are placed equidistant from the kick and the snare, with both capsules aimed at the snare. The reason why this works well is because if both mics are equidistant, that means that the sound is going to get to the mics at the same time. What that means is that the image of the snare and the kick is always going to be in the center. But because it's a spaced pair, we get the little added benefit that all of the peripheral drums, all of the cymbals, hi-hats, toms, they're all going to dance around the stereo image in a really cool way. So to demonstrate how to get this set up right, Matt is going to help me out here. What we want to do is take an XLR cable and hold down one end of the XLR cable using the pedal of the kick drum. That's exactly where the pedal is going to hit the batter head, so that's exactly where the sound is going to emanate from. So we can hold one end of the XLR down with the batter of the kick, and the other end of our XLR is going to be held down at the very center of the snare drum where the drummer is going to be hitting. All right, Matt, if you could pull those up. And what we get here is a triangle that we can then use to place our first mic. We place our first mic based on how high we want it, meaning do we want a tighter sound or a roomier sound or a nice balance between the two. This is going to be a nice balance between the two. And then we can actually trace this back in an arc. And anything that is along that arc, no matter how far you go, is always going to be equidistant from the kick and the snare. So our second mic has been placed over the drummer's shoulder, maybe about 45 degrees in rotation. And that's going to give us our left pickup. All right, let's give that a go and see how it sounds. So again, the idea is if you trace that arc, no matter where you place your microphone, your second microphone, you're always going to have a center image for a snare and a kick. Now what becomes really interesting is when we no longer use a cardioid pickup, but when we switch to figure 8. If you remember before with the coincident pairs, when we switched to figure 8, we ended up getting a wider image. What's interesting is that now the opposite's going to happen. I'm going to switch these mics to figure 8, and what we're going to find is that the sound focuses in on the center image a lot more, and we end up with a tighter sound. All right, Matt, take it away. So now we're going to talk about the Glyn Johns technique. This is a technique that's most famous for a lot of the Led Zeppelin recordings where you have this very powerful yet roomy kind of sound. So this is basically an extension of the Recorderman technique in the sense that we have the microphones placed equidistant from the snare and the kick, but there's a few things that make this particular technique unique. The first is that our snare mic here, this overhead, is going to be right above the snare, and it has to be fairly close for this technique to really work properly. So the way I usually like to measure it is I like to take 2 drumsticks and then add about 3 inches. And Matt, if you could stack those up, you can see that these 2 drumsticks come pretty close to where this microphone is placed. And the other microphone is going to be the same distance approximately. Now this second microphone is also very uniquely placed. It is basically parallel to the floor in its trajectory. It is aimed at the snare. There is a very, very tiny bit of angling, but it's almost aimed at a plane that's parallel to where the snare is sitting. And it's hanging like right over the floor tom. So you've got the center of your kit, you've got one mic pointing at the snare from above, you've got one mic pointing at the snare from right past where the floor tom's at. And this couples really well when you have a kick drum mic, and you can use those 3 microphones together to completely capture the entire sound. The Glyn Johns technique tends to work very well in roomy spaces, like this one. It tends to be a little awkward in very tight rooms like ISO rooms. So my preference is usually if I'm recording something that's, well, like in a church, like Led Zeppelin did, then this would be a good technique to try out. All right, Matt, take it away. Now the last thing that's really important about the Glyn Johns technique is that in order to get a balanced stereo image, you do not pan the 2 microphones hard right and hard left. You actually have to take the right microphone and pan it into the center, usually about 30 to 40 on the pan position off. But you use your ear and your judgment. It's going to change based on a lot of different factors. So I want to discuss the ideas behind why we might choose which microphones we want to use for our drum overheads. And the answer is that it's not really so simple as to why we would pick one over another or what's really the best. A lot of it comes down to what we're trying to go for. So we are going to do a quick shootout between a Royer 122, which is an active ribbon microphone, and a C414, which is a cardioid condenser microphone, just to hear the differences. I believe that I have this switched into figure 8, so we're going to get a similar pickup pattern. But here are the reasons why we might pick one microphone over another. One is going to be the frequency response. You'll find that the Royer 122 is actually a surprisingly bright microphone, even though it is a ribbon. We're going to get a lot of top end. It's going to have a really nice texture to the top end. It's going to sound really open. C414, it has a good pickup of the top end, but I'd say it's a little more neutral. There's no boost going on up there. It's pretty flat. So it's going to sound very even. It's going to sound very smooth. Really just depends on what we're going for, what the cymbals sound like. Then there's also going to be differences throughout the rest of the frequency response. The Royer 122 is going to have a very firm bottom end. The C414, again, it's a fairly neutral microphone, so we're going to get a pretty flat response. Another reason why you would want to pick a certain microphone is going to be because of the pickup patterns. Now, in the case of the C414, you have a lot of different pickup patterns that you can choose from, which makes it very convenient for doing overheads because you can simply flick a switch and get a different pickup. For the Royer 122s, you're kind of stuck with what you got. There's no flexibility in terms of how it picks up. It's a wide figure 8 pickup. Now, there's a lot of other microphones that are great as overheads. U67s, Sound Deluxe 251s, you know, basically you name it, anything can work as an overhead if you know what you're doing. Even things like the Bayer 160s sound fantastic as overheads. It's all in where you place it. It's all in what sound you're trying to get. And ultimately, really, comes down to the drummer. So, with all of that being said, we're going to do a quick shootout. We're going to do one pass where you hear the C414 in action, and then another pass where you hear the Royer 122 in action. All right, Matt, that's you.
Erik kind of already placed the overheads, which are two blue hummingbirds. We auditioned those last night among a few other pairs of mics, and these sounded the best, the biggest, had the nicest kind of natural EQ without us having to do any processing. So we're going to go with these. They're really cool mics. They have a swivel head, Erik, if you can demonstrate, which we're not making use of, but it's really cool if you're using them on snare or hi-hat. You can really kind of dial in the capsule wherever you want it to be aimed to. But we're just doing a standard XY. It's kind of a tighter focus, but we have a huge room sound in here with spaced pair room mics. So the overheads are a little bit tighter, the rooms are a little bit wider, but it makes nice room for guitars and stuff when you're panning them hard left and right.
Something too maybe about this mic configuration, which is kind of interesting, is that because the capsules are so close to each other, you can kind of position these. You don't have to necessarily think about going directly over a snare drum to think about your snare being focused right in the middle of your, in the stereo field when you're listening. You can kind of move it. I like to try and position them a little bit where you're in between your cymbals, because the amount of time it takes for the sound from this snare drum to come up and hit both of these capsules, because the capsules are so close, that time distance is pretty doggone close. So whereas if you have a spaced pair and you don't measure it out properly, it takes longer for the snare to get to one mic than it might to the other. So that's one thing I know. It's important to measure out your overheads and make sure you've got the same distance, but then I think you might trade off where your cymbals are, so the distance from where your cymbals are to one mic and the other. But if you do an XY, they're so close, same amount of time it takes for that sound to get up to the capsules. So
Your snare doesn't sound like it's dragging to the left.
Yeah, so, and you'll hear that when we get them going.
So as a kick drum, we've chosen what we do a lot here at Echo Bar is a Lewitt. You want to come see this? 640 Rex that contains two capsules, a condenser and a dynamic together, perfectly in phase, with a Y cable that splits out, so you can go to two different preamps. And it's great because you get 2 mics in one. A lot of people, they put a bunch of mics on the kick, and it's hard to position them. You got to kind of pick one for the optimal position, and they kind of do one outside. This way we get both the condenser and the dynamic inside the hole. We don't go too far in. Both Erik and I kind of prefer kind of right inside the hole, not all the way. A lot of guys go all the way in close to the front head to get that beater sound. We never have trouble getting attack on the kick drum. There's always easy to get more attack. What's hard to get if you push it all the way in is a nice low end. So this, we get the fullness of the drum. The drum's not behind the mic. It's the mic's at the end of the drum. So we get a nice full sound, nice punchy sound. The condenser has a nice top end snap and a good sub where the dynamic has a nice punch to it. So that's a great bass drum mic. We really like that. That's the 640 Rex by Lewitt. And then Erik's got a old school NS10 woofer as a sub kick.
It's literally a woofer that
wired an XLR
we just
jack
soldered on an XLR jack right here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera there, but get that down close. But just soldering on this jack onto the terminals here, and it's great for picking up the super sub frequencies in the drum. And I think Yamaha makes these too. Kind of a I'll go this way.
What's that? Oh, no.
But this is great if you don't have to use an NS10. You can use any woofer that you want. The one thing is sometimes guys will solder in a resistor just as an attenuator because the signal coming out is pretty hot.
Yeah.
So, but we've got a preamp that's got a big enough pad on it that we can handle it. So
if you think of microphones, they have a diaphragm. A speaker is a diaphragm as well. So you just wire it in reverse and it's a microphone. But because it is a woofer, it picks up all low frequencies. Because it's this big, it picks up nice sub frequencies where most diaphragms are 1 inch or less. So it does a really good job of getting really low sub stuff. And Yamaha actually makes a manufactured sub kick with a nice, looks like a drum, looks like a tom. But we actually like the sound of just the NS10 woofer a little bit better. So yeah, it really makes for a nice full low end. So in a lot of studios, we end up putting blankets over the microphones to keep the cymbals out of the mics. So we'll kind of make like a little tunnel in the shape of the bass drum and support it with a couple stands. And funny enough, for some reason in this room, we don't have a lot of problem with sound getting back into the kick drum mic from the cymbals. So it's fairly isolated, definitely enough to working with the drum mix. And so we actually don't bother with the blankets, and it actually sounds awesome. So, but sometimes people do that. They create a little tunnel and kind of shield the mics from the cymbals.
Talk a little bit about the snare drum miking. This is kind of a cool thing that my good buddy Bob Horn showed me, which I've used this for years and years and years now. But this is an SM57, and it's not that it's broken and messed up, and that we put all this tape on it. But the idea behind it is what you gotta. I think sometimes everybody focuses on the front end of the mic and the way that the mic picks up sound, but another way to think about microphones is how they reject sound. This one being cardioid, it rejects sounds that are coming at the mic this way. So this being the back of the mic, any sounds that come in, and it's pretty good at not hearing the sound when you point the back of the mic at something you don't want. So what's great about this is when you take this 57 and you can unscrew it, I can show you on our bottom snare mic, you got to be careful because the leads in here can come off, but if you're gentle, you can unscrew this 57 and then just watch your leads. They're a little coiled up, but with some care, you can take that, kind of place it on top of it, and then put some tape on it to support it. And then you can do the same kind of thing with just a standard 57. But what's great about it is that normally a 57, by the time you get the cable plugged into this thing, it's, we're talking 8-9 inches long. And that thing I was saying about pointing the back of the mic towards sounds you don't want to hear, what's what we don't want to hear, a lot of times you get a lot of bleed from your hi-hats into your snare mic. So if you put this microphone up, you can't get the back of the mic pointed at the hi-hat because it's too long. So if you take a mic like this, split it in half the way we've done it here, now you can sneak this in and get it in here and have the back of the microphone pointed at the snare, or at the hi-hat rather, and you're rejecting more of the hi-hat from this microphone here. So that's one method you can use to help yourself in placing and trying to keep the bleed to a minimum, or at least better, with that top snare placement. So we like to get it in here, get the back of the mic, get the front of the mic pointed to the drum the way you want, but then also think about where the back of the mic is faced. And like I said, try and get the back of the mic pointed towards your hi-hat, and you can reject a little bit better that way. And then with your bottom mic, another thing to watch is where the snares are on the bottom of the drum, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera unless you get all the way down and shoot up underneath the drum. But the physical snares, the wires, maybe Bob, hand me that drum.
Yeah.
The physical snares right here, if you put a mic directly on this, if pointed directly at this, it can get a little too much of that. So a lot of times we like to try and get the mic a little off and away from the physical snare, so get it over the wires and get it over off to the side. And sometimes you'll have to ask the drummer you can even turn the snare drum in the stand for you when you're doing that. So don't be afraid to ask your drummer for some help too when you're setting things up like this. And I think too, you don't necessarily want to be right up on the skin on this too. It'll end up getting too brittle. So give yourself a little space.
Actually, one thing that Erik and I both believe in is, so I am going to turn the snare, because if you look on top, I'll kind of tilt it, the tape is on here to kind of kill some of the ring. And you don't want to put the mic where the tape is, because you're miking the tape, and that's an especially dead part of the head. So it's not going to sound as lively and resonant. So actually kind of spin the drum so the tape is away from not being right underneath the microphone diaphragm. So yeah, you might have to look at your snare wires one more time.
Maybe you can rotate just a little more clockwise. Yep. There we go. That's great.
And we have between the snares the drummer brought and what we have in house, we have about 14 snares to choose from today for the song. I think we've got, knowing what the song's going to sound like, we have about 5 or 6 narrowed down, and we've tuned those up all with brand new heads. We brought Drum Doctor in. Drum Doctor is a service, professional drum tuning. They reheaded the whole kit, so it really will sound, everything will sound optimal, the best it can sound. It's tuned professionally. It's really going to sound great. So once we get started recording, we'll kind of audition a few different snares and see what we like for the particular song we're recording today.
Another thing too, just going back on that point of thinking about where you're pointing the back of the mic. Sometimes Bob and I like to try this, and we'll test it out and see how it sounds. Sometimes it seems like it's really great, and sometimes it doesn't work and we do something different. But we're going to try it to start with today, which is, once again, pointing the back of the mic towards the thing you want to reject, which is, if this is the hi-hat mic, we want to try and keep the snare drum at a minimum in the hi-hat mic. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll take the hi-hat mic and we'll actually point it this way, and sometimes even come up underneath the hi-hat. We'll try it on top, but back of the mic facing more in this direction of the snare, and of course the capsule is towards the edge here of the hi-hat. So we can try that. We'll start there and see what it sounds like, and if we need to make an adjustment, we will.
Kind of say on the note of Erik and my style of drum recording and engineering, we like every drum isolated and then blend in the beautiful sounding room and overheads. Our overheads kind of capture the whole kit, not just the cymbals. So we can use just the overheads and just a little bit of kick and snare in a mix if we wanted to, and you'd hear every tom, every cymbal, everything. So we go for what they're called overheads rather than cymbal mics. So with that being said, some engineers like every mic to be a little more open and kind of capture whatever it's pointed at. And for that style, it's probably best to have every mic. I know some engineers, they'll say every mic should face the snare. So your hi-hat, it'll point at the hi-hat, capturing the hi-hat, but on the way to the snare. And then your rack tom pointed at the rack tom on the way to the snare. And then that way, the bleed of every mic is a little more natural, and you can have those individual mics louder. But for this, we want a tight, focused drum. When you hear it in the stereo perspective, you hear the panning of each drum, every tom, hi-hat, everything, and then blend in the room mics to kind of fill it out. That's kind of our style. Some guys like to have keep the tom bleed where we kind of gate it out or edit it out with just cutting the Pro Tools files. We just like a very focused, isolated sound. Some people are different. Some people like minimal miking, and in that case, we'd probably do the opposite with a hi-hat mic, which is kind of pointed at the whole kit as it picks up the hi-hat. But for today, we're going for an isolated thing. So all the mics, we're trying to keep the other drums out of them.
So we'll do the rack tom next. This is another, it's the same mic that we have on the kick drum, but we're only going to utilize the condenser side, the condenser capsule inside the mic. So it's the Lewitt Rex 640, and we're going to use this type of mic on the floor tom as well. But the condenser mic gives you a lot more of that snap up top, and it's one of my personal favorites on toms. And you come in on a tom, kind of any drum really, but the closer you get it in over the head and pointed more towards the center, you're going to get more of that stick attack, but you're going to miss out on some of the resonance and the tone of the drum itself. So the further you back the mic off, the more of the tone you're going to get, but you're also going to pick up the space that the kit is in. So it's kind of a balance of figuring out what you want there, how much stick attack versus how much of the resonance of the drum and the space that you're in. So kind of come up over the rim of the drum itself, but almost pointed at the center, but you're still further back from the drum, and you can get a pretty good balance that way.
If you can kind of get in here with the camera, it kind of makes sense if you...
Maybe from over here.
If you had the mic pointed straight down, it's not pointed at where the stick meets the head. So, like Erik said, you'll get a little fuller sound. So, if he wanted more stick attack, all he has to do is move the mic a half inch, and it's literally pointed where the stick meets the head, and you're going to instantly have more attack without any EQ, any compression, anything. And at the same point, if your drums are too attacky, too clicky with the stick sound, you can turn the mic the other way and get a more round sound. So it's just kind of your preference. You go in the control room, listen, and decide how the attack sounds. Same thing with the snare. If you want more attack, just angle that diaphragm out so it kind of hits where the stick is hitting, which Erik already has. So if it was too attacky, which for drum lovers it never is, he could angle this down towards the ring. And with the snare, since it's an open, kind of ringy sounding snare, not only will he get less attack, but he'll get more ring. So if that's something you desire, that'll happen.
Cool. Talk about the ride cymbal. What we're really trying to achieve here, this is kind of a fun technique, is to mic it from underneath the drum, but it goes along with exactly what Bob and I were saying, which is we're trying to kind of isolate each one of the drums as best we can. So with that concept in mind, you're thinking about the back of the microphone and what is it facing. And here we're most concerned with trying to keep the snare drum out of the ride itself. So you can come up under here, and we'll see if we can get this worked in there. Might bring this down a bit. But pointing the back of the microphone more towards the snare drum, but you can come with the diaphragm and get right up underneath the bell of the ride cymbal here. So you get a great sound on the bell and also maintaining the rejection of the snare drum in this particular microphone. So we got to get up under here. It's a little tricky sometimes. We might use a different stand. We'll see.
A lot of this mic ends up being just kind of barely blended in because, again, we are using a lot of the overheads, which do pick up the cymbals quite well. So this is just kind of an accent when you get to the last chorus of the song and the track's blaring and you just want a little more definition on the ride cymbal, you push this track up a little bit. And because the mic is nice and focused just on this ride cymbal, you get exactly what you need and it cuts through. Since it's upside down though, it's basically opposite of our overheads. You need to flip the phase because you have diaphragms moving opposite directions. And if you think of your diaphragm moving as your waveform moves, the diaphragm moves up and down, your waveform moves up and down. They're basically opposite. So you need to flip the phase on polarity, I should say, flip the polarity on this mic so that they're both moving the same direction. So you don't have any cancellations.
Well, I like to check clearance. If somebody really wants to go in for a big smash on the ride, seeing just how far it'll go before you hit your mic, but I think we're in the clear here on this. And then floor tom, very, very much the same as the rack tom, which same thing. And we might maybe we'll move the tape over just to do like what we were talking about with the miking up the dead part of the drum right where that tape is. So we want to
move the tape instead of the drum. It's easier.
Yep. Clear that. Cool. All right.
So for any drummers out there, this is a Gretsch kit, and we're starting out with a Ludwig acrylite snare. And I think mostly Zildjian cymbals, except for this Sabian Evolution HHX. So now room mics, I guess.
Room mics, yep.
Behind you.
So we got a couple of different things. We have a spaced pair of room mics. These are the Lewitt LCT 550s. These are the noiseless mics that they make. Extremely quiet, zero self noise. And it's funny, we noticed that last night when we pulled them up and we're listening, and I kept turning up the gain, and usually you see a little bit of meter move in Pro Tools, and I wasn't seeing anything, and I was like, man, are these on? And then heard a drum through it, and man, took my head off. It was great. So we're doing a little bit of roll off here, 80 hertz, just to kill a little bit of the low end, and then a little 6 dB pad, because this room, it's not a physically big room, but it's a very sonically sounding big room. So when those drums are live in here, it's going to get really loud. So we'll put a little bit of a pad on the mics to make sure we don't distort. But it's part of this other mic over here, which is a spaced pair, and we've kind of got them aimed at the kit, relatively the same distances. You'll find is
16 feet away, maybe?
About 16 feet. I think the further you get your mics, the less directional it ends up becoming. But you'll still hear it. You'll be able to kind of hear where snares and toms are placed, or the hi-hat and the toms and the rides are placed when we pull it up and listen.
This model is it's actually cardioid only, so we're just using the cardioid pattern.
Right. Yeah. And then Blue Microphones was really nice and came in and let us use this really amazing condenser mic. This is the Kiwi, and it's a really cool sounding mic. We thought we'd throw up a mono room mic and see what that sounds like as well. And it could be something that we end up using or not using. And I think when you guys get the session, we'll probably leave it for you. And then if you guys come up with something creative use for it, then that'll be cool too. So, but just a mono room mic, and I think that's it for all of our drum mics and the drum makeup.
So we're here in Studio A at the Echo Bar, and this is Erik's world, Erik's room. Erik, if you want to take us through some of the gear and that we're working with today.
Yeah, right now we're going to get started getting some drum sounds. So we went over the microphones with you guys earlier, and now we'll talk a little bit about the preamps and some of our additional processing that we're going to do in the outboard gear world.
What version of Pro Tools are you running?
I'm running 11 right now, Pro Tools 11. It's we've got 24 ins and outs on these Lynx Aurora converters down here, and it's an HDX system, and we're going to be the sessions at 48K 32-bit, and using pretty much all of our inputs, but we'll go over them one by one here as well. So first thing is the kick drum, and we've got that Rec 640 where we showed you it had the two elements in it, the condenser element and the dynamic element, and those are going to come up here with these inward connection Magnum preamps. These are really nice preamps, kind of thick and punchy sounding as well, which I like that on kick drum. From there, we're going to go over here to these SSL, the 611 EQs, and we're doing some processing, some EQ on the kick drum. I guess we can play some of that. Good. So right now we're hearing just the dynamic side of that kick drum. So boosting a little bit of high end, 10K, trying to get a little more of the air and click out of that kick. And then this is without any EQ. That's with the EQ. Boosting a little bit at about 4.5K. Slightly tighter bell on my Q, and then dipping out quite a bit around, kind of hard to see I guess, but probably somewhere in the 600 to 700 range. And a medium bell, medium Q, and then boosting probably somewhere around 100 hertz, maybe.
Is that a shelf on the low or
No,
a bell?
bell on the bottom. So we'll pop it in and out again one more time. That's out. That's in.
Nice.
So pretty nice sound. Next mic up is the condenser side of that Rec 640. So same preamp, same flavor of preamp, the Magnum by Inward Connections, and running that through the second SSL and EQ, and doing roughly the same type of thing, but not quite as drastic. I'm not boosting quite as much or cutting quite as much, but roughly those same frequencies as well. So once again, a little bit of air up on top at around 10K, and then dipping out maybe just a little bit lower, or excuse me, boosting a little bit more in the mid-range, so maybe around 3K or so. Pretty narrow, or pretty medium-sized Q, excuse me. And then a little bit different. The sound of that element had something a little different in the low mids to my ear, so I'm at right around 300 hertz and dipping out quite a bit with a fairly tight Q. And then same kind of boost around that 100 hertz area with the bell, not a shelf, but bell. So here it is with the EQ out. And here it is with it in. Cool.
Nice. It's cool when you hear those two together now.
Yeah.
So this will be the dynamic and the condenser mixed together.
Yeah. So pretty, what's great once again is that the capsules in that microphone are aligned. Bob showed you that on camera. It's that you're not going to be worrying about any type of phasing issues based on time, the capsules being further apart. So you don't run into those weird phase anomalies because the capsules are perfectly aligned inside the casing of the microphone itself.
And again, you hear there's plenty of attack, plenty of high end, plenty of clarity, so you don't have to shove the mic all the way into the bass drum to get that. We have plenty of the attack, and we actually have a nice low end without hardly any effort. So you don't have to push that mic all the way inside the bass drum. You can leave it near the entrance of the hole and, get the full sound of the drum.
Cool. Next is the Yamaha NS10 woofer, and this thing's it's really cool. If you guys don't have speakers that have a subwoofer attached, or they go down this low, you're going to miss some of the big bottom that we have going on. But if you do have a subwoofer attached to your speakers, you'll be able to hear this a lot better. But remember too, I showed you that we just wired on an XLR cable right onto it. Some people have to put a resistor in between just to knock the level down, but we're using a preamp that's got a pretty heavy-duty pad on it. So we're going minus 20 dB on this this JDK preamp, and got plenty of level coming in, as you can see as well. And this just fills out the the sub part, the bottom end of that kick. So when we combine it with the other two microphones, the other two elements of the one microphone, you get a really full range.
So can you play the dynamic and condenser and then mute the sub and kind of add it in, and then take it back away so that they can hear
Sure.
exactly what that adds to the...
A little more, Chet. Keep going. So we'll do this. I'm going to slowly bring the fader up, and you guys can hear how it kind of fills in on the sub stuff.
Yeah.
So, there you go. Pretty big. Cool. Okay.
Thanks, Chet. You can stop the kick
Thanks,
now.
Chet. Oh, hang on. He's got to hear us. Okay. Thanks, Chet. Give the old leg a rest. Cool. Snare drum. Let's see. So, SM57 on top.
Probably the most famous snare mic ever.
And we're running that through the, this is a really cool preamp, and it's really affordable. This is a Classic Audio Products of Illinois VP26 preamp, and these are sold by a guy who is an absolute API fanatic. His name is Jeff, I think it's Steigler. I hope I got that right, Jeff. He sells these as kits, so if you guys are savvy with your soldering skills, you can buy these as a kit and put them together yourself. That's what I did with these, and it's a fairly simple build, so it's not crazy complicated, and really affordable too if you're looking to get into a preamp that's a really great preamp, and for not a ton of money. But these are based off of the old kind of mid to late 70s API consoles, and they have an amazing input transformer that is just, that's where you get that API sound from, is the input transformer. And you also can choose the different op amps that you want. They're the 2025s, but you can do the red dots, or you can pick some of the other ones, the blue dots, but you can change up the variety and the flavor of those op amps to your own taste and liking. And what's really neat is you can drive the input transformer with this gain, but then you have an output attenuator, so you can turn down so you don't hit your recording medium too hard, but you can still drive that transformer and get some grit and some cool harmonics coming out of the transformer, which is a really, really neat sound. So we've got these on both the top snare and the bottom snare. Right now we're hearing the top snare, and from the preamp we're going over to this Better Maker, the 502P. It's their Pultec style EQ, and what we're doing is boosting a little bit of air up on top, around 10K, maybe 3 dB or so, 2.5, 3 dB, and then that's pretty much it. Not really cutting anything on the bottom.
Just engage that, see what it sounds like without.
Yeah. That's out. and back in.
So really clearing it up.
Yeah, a lot of top end, maybe even too much. You might play with that a little bit in the mix here before we really commit to it, but you can hear it.
So the bottom mic is at a flipped polarity because it's, again, like we mentioned with the ride cymbal mic, it's underneath the drum. And again, if you think of the way the diaphragms of the mics react, they're moving opposite, and the drum heads are moving the same. When it hits the top head, the bottom head follows. So when he hits the top head and the top head goes down, the bottom head goes down as well. So those are moving in sync. And the top mic and the bottom mic are moving opposite. So you got to flip the polarity of the bottom mic so that those move together as well.
So that's what we did right here on this preamp, this other VP26. Got the polarity flipped, and I think I'll pop it in and out and you guys can hear it, I think, when I do it.
Oh, so a little bit.
Yeah. All right, so this is with the bottom mic, the polarity not flipped, but it would be what we would call out of phase because of the position. If you listen to that, you kind of hear the body of the snare go away, some of the roundness and the bigger parts of it go away, but as soon as we flip the phase on it, you get more of that round part of the shell comes back into play. So,
sounds kind of subtle, but when you get down to mixing the entire song, it can really make a difference of losing the snare in the mix or cutting through. And at the same time, you want to get all the mics, the whole kit, in phase. Whenever you're recording any source with multiple microphones, you never want any of the polarity of any of those mics to be opposite one another. So the snare versus the overhead versus the room mics. We'll sit here and test them all, and on the room mics, we'll check the polarity, and if the snare's punchier with it flipped, we'll go with it flipped. So you just kind of got to use your ears and get used to it, and kind of flip those polarity buttons and see what sounds best. But when they're upside down from each other, you got to flip it. So.
cool. All right, Chet, let's do a little hi-hat, please. Okay, so next on the hi-hat, we have the LCT 350, which is that condenser mic. And remember, we kind of pointed the back of the microphone towards the snare, and the capsule of the microphone is towards the outer edge of the hi-hat. So we're running that through the Tone Lux preamp, this MP5A. And one of the really neat features on this Tone Lux is it has this tilt EQ, which is built right in. And the way the tilt EQ works is you have one knob, but it kind of puts a pivot, a fulcrum right at a center frequency. And as you
seesaw.
It's like a seesaw, yeah. So as you turn the tilt, you can actually get the high end will go up, and at the same time the low end goes down, or you can do it the other way around. Low end comes up and the high end goes down. But it's great. I love them. I love that tilt EQ, especially on things like hi-hat and ride, where you can kind of dip out some of the low end of maybe the kick drum that's going to bleed into that mic, as well as brighten up the hats a bit with some of the top end. So it's all one movement, which is really nice. That's why I like that preamp. And then also got it going down to this Tone Lux EQ, which is the EQ5P, and I'm not really doing a whole lot other than a high-pass filter. So that's it. We'll see how it sounds like once we play it here. But all right, Chet, why don't you go ahead and just give us some hi-hat. So I'll show you what, I can pop this tilt EQ in and out, and you can kind of hear it. That's with it out. And that's with it in. Definitely gets brighter, and some of that low end clears up a bit as well. And also with this high pass filter on the EQ below. That might be a hair. Out and back in. So that's kind of it on the hi-hat. All right, thanks, Chet. All right, and so next we have the ride. Remember, we put that mic underneath the ride, bottom side of the ride cymbal pointed up at the bell. And one of the things Bob said, you know, that we need to be mindful of is probably flipping the polarity on that one as well, because of the nature of the way it's faced from the bottom coming up.
Versus the overheads, which are facing the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
this is basically the same chain, same mic, right?
Same chain, same mic, and kind of the same, very similar. Have that tilt EQ engaged again on it, dip out some of that bottom end and brighten it up on the top end. So we'll go ahead and let Chet play a little bit on the ride cymbal for us, and we'll take a listen. Once again, I can pop out the tilt EQ so you can hear it. It's pretty dark that way, and as soon as you put that tilt EQ in, I could even roll the knob so you can kind of hear the seesaw effect, really. But that's with it zeroed. As you start turning it up, the low end goes away, but the high end comes in. So kind of right in there somewhere.
So that makes for a very strong processing as opposed to just boosting the high end or just cutting the lows. You're doing both at the same time, so just a couple dB will be more drastic than if you were just to boost the high end.
Yep. And kind of the same flavor once again on the EQ 5P from Tone Lux as well. So we'll just pop that in and out a little bit for you. That's with it out. And there it is in. So, hi-hat and ride. Okay, thanks, Chet. Next on the list here is the rack tom, and we're using those Rec 640s, just the condenser side of the microphone. We're not using the dynamic side, and those are going to run through once again those I call them Cappies, but it's Classic Audio Products of Illinois, but CAPI, the VP26s, and they're just really, really great, thick with those transformers on the inputs, and really great for toms. So, and then they're running from the VP26 down to this spec EQ, this ASCV. It's a 500 series EQ. It's a really nice EQ, very just good multi-purpose, but to my ear, I think it just has kind of a really it's a smooth tone, but not dull. It's just a very nice sounding, good sounding, very versatile EQ, parametric EQ.
So on this rack tom, can you show us what it's like in both positions, having the pre-loud with the output low and then the pre-low with the output loud?
Sure, yeah. So Chet, if you wouldn't mind, sir, please play on the rack tom.
So we're going to push the pre and turn the output gain down. So we're hitting the transformer harder as we turn the pre louder. You see it gets a little bit fuzzy and crunchy, and could be cool for certain styles of music. And obviously you don't have to go that extreme if you don't want to. And then now we'll go conservative, so we'll crank the output up, but we'll turn the pre down. So that's a little more squeaky clean version.
A little cleaner.
So great preamps for really dialing in whatever you want.
Then we're using, after the preamp, we're using this spec EQ. It's a ASCV spec EQ. It's a 4-band EQ. It's got a high and low shelf, which you can actually switch in and out, and then it's got two middle bands, a mid and low mid range. And they're really great EQs, kind of a pleasant, smooth sounding EQ, but not, I wouldn't call it dark. It's nice and smooth and clean. But really good for digging in on sounds if you like to shape sound quite a bit. So you'll hear it as I pop this out, kind of how drastic the tom sound changes. So this is with the EQ in, and here it is out. So pretty drastic. I'll show you what I'm doing. So up on the top end, I am using the shelf setting, and I am probably boosting 2-3 dB at that 10K again, and then a little bit of the mid-range right around 3K with a pretty tight bandwidth on my my Q setting here, and then 2 or 3 dB, and then probably dipping out 300 or 400 hertz on a medium to tight Q, and then boosting a little bit 100 on the low shelf, so maybe 4 or 5 dB. So here it is out again, and here it is in.
Sounds like there might be a little too much taping on that head. It's pretty muted.
Yeah.
Although we might like it in the song, but I'm gonna go look at the tape out there and maybe loosen it up a little bit. Maybe get a little more sustain out of the top.
Right. All right, Chet, coming out. Hang in there.
Chet, is there tape on that rack tom? There is. Let's loosen that up a little bit. It's pretty tight. Yeah, and maybe just kind of pull back half of it or something over on itself. Does that kind of loosen it up? So a little better, or is it kind of the same?
A little better. I almost feel like I hear some kind of a ring or an overtone that wasn't there before. But I think it is more open. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we just don't want it to sound like it's gated or anything.
Sure.
We'll go with that and check it out once we get the song going.
All right. Cool. All right.
All right, Chet.
Thanks, Chet. All right. Next, same thing kind of on the floor tom. Once again, the VP26 for the preamp, and then another of the spec ASCV EQ. So we'll let you hear what that sounds like. Floor tom, please, sir. So this is with the EQ in and out. So EQ in, cleaning it up a little bit and getting a little more attack out, and cleaning up some sort of that tubby sound that's in there. But EQ wise, looks like I've got something a little higher this time, maybe around 12K on the shelf, boosting maybe 2 dB, dipping out somewhere in between 500 and 600 hertz. It's not labeled on the EQ, you hear it, but dipping out maybe 5 dB or so with a little bit broader Q, and then also dipping out maybe right around 200 and just a hair, maybe a half dB or so, and then another boost on the low shelf at 100 hertz, maybe a dB, and that seemed to
sound good.
Yep. Cool. All right. Thanks, Chet. So next is overheads. Okay. So for overheads, we have our they're the blue Hummingbird mics, and they're in that XY configuration. And this is where you'll get a feel. I guess Chet, we ought to have you play maybe just the cymbals, but or whole kit. Maybe to kind of, I think whole kit, that'll really help you hear the snare in the
maybe,
center.
play the whole kit, but include some cymbals fairly often.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
So you're listening back, you can really tell that the imaging on the snare drum is not panned one side or the other. It's pretty dead center in your speakers, and that's one of the benefits of that XY technique. It keeps that snare drum in the middle in your stereo field. And your kick drum as well. But your image is definitely more narrow when you come in with an XY like that. But really like the sound of those mics. We're not doing any EQ after it. The preamps they're going through are these Shadow Hills, this quad gamma array up here, but we're using 2 of their gamma preamps up here. And
But you're going discrete, right?
Yeah.
You're not using any transformers.
no. So no transformers on them, so just a very kind of what goes in is what comes out type sound.
You definitely hear the whole kit. Like they're not really just cymbal mics. They're the whole kit mics. So we're getting the cymbals as the main focus, but you're hearing all the toms, snare. Maybe not so much enough of the kicks, but we can start with the overheads and then kind of blend the spot mics in just for more power on individual toms and other drums as we need it. So it really helps to have a natural sound rather than just every cymbal and every drum course mic sounding really overly separated and not natural. So this way of miking the overheads really works to get the whole kit.
All right, thanks, Matt. We got a couple of room options here for you. So we have that space pair room mics, which are the Lewitt LCT 550s, which are those noiseless mics, really quiet mics.
Really sensitive too.
Super sensitive.
Great for distance miking.
Yeah, and handle quite a bit of SPL. It really can handle a lot of volume coming at them. So they are going through the. I also have these other gamma preamps. They're basically the same as the gamma preamps up here, although they do have some slightly different transformer options than what these do up here. So, and we're also running them. Well, we'll go over the preamp. They're going through the. I'm using the steel transformers on the preamps, and to my ear, they're a little more gritty. It's subtle. It's very subtle, but a little more gritty than, say, some of your other options, the iron transformers or the nickel transformers.
They actually, yeah, these Shadow Hills, they have selectable transformers, unlike most preamps where you just get one set of transformers and that's what you have. These have different sounding transformers in the preamp, which you can select. And steel seems to be our favorite a lot, on a lot of different sources.
Yeah. And from there, we are hitting the Shadow Hills mastering compressor and doing a little bit of a squishy vibe with the compressor. So not using the optical portion of the compressor, just using the discrete part of the compressor. The ratio is set to flood. The attack time is 0.5.
The ratio set to what?
Flood.
Flood? What does that mean?
So flood, I guess, is a. I'd actually have to look at it. It's just a super high. It's a super high ratio. It's
extreme?
probably 20 to 1 or something.
Oh,
It's
okay.
really big ratio.
Flood.
Flood. Right. I guess you wouldn't know that. I say flood all the time, and it's like, well, wait, what does flood mean? Right. Flood. High ratio. Big ratio. Tack time is 0.5 and
Pretty quick.
very fast.
Very quick. Yeah.
And then the recovery is 0.1. So
Yeah, fast release on room mics is how you get all the power, because the compressor hits, it comes back fast. So in between drum hits, the sound of the room, it just kind of grabs all the low level sound and brings it up, so your room actually ends up sounding bigger and longer than it actually is. So that's kind of the secret, is having a fast attack time. We can demonstrate that if you go ahead and set those as slow as they can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now, when he starts playing, the compression is going to stay down, and it'll actually sound
Kind of
well, it won't
choked
be
a little bit.
not as fun.
There you go. Okay, Chet, maybe do that same thing on the kit. Again, give us the whole kit. So,
You're doing it a little more extreme threshold.
yeah, so we got to hit the threshold differently.
So actually, they're so slow, we're actually just losing volume. But keep it there and start to ease back the release time.
I'm sorry, the attack time is what I had pushed up.
Oh, okay.
So
do the other way.
yeah, so if we do 0.5 on our attack, but then kill the release time, it's kind of subdued for too long of a time. You need it to come back up to get.
So now start to make the release faster, and you guys will hear.
So this is 1.2
seconds.
Yep. And now we're going to 0.8. Point 0.5. 0.25. And 0.1. This is kind of where I think we've had it set. So you kind of get the different vibes.
That's our chance for the biggest, biggest sounding.
We can pop it out all together, so no, you can hear the room mics without the compressor. So here it is out. It's much tighter and smaller sounding to my ear. Put it in, a lot of that room sound just gets brought up.
That's where the excitement is.
It's fun.
So fast release, fast attack, fast release.
Fast attack, fast release. And then lastly, we have around the rooms. We have the that blue Kiwi, which is a mono room mic we've set up, and where's that going to? Let's see. That's going to we are using the AEA RPQ 500, their 500 series preamp, and didn't really do any tone shaping. We might actually shape that here as we get into it a little bit, but it's mic just hitting the preamp, and then from the preamp we are going over here to another compressor. So this compressor is the Overstayer FET compressor, the FET compressor. It's a stereo compressor, but I'm just using one side of it right now. But it's a really fun compressor. It can get really squishy and really dirty. It's got some cool features on it. And Bob's actually a big fan of these. I'm going to let Bob explain the compressor because he knows it so well.
It's just, it doesn't sound like any plug-in or any other hardware compressor out there. It's got its own thing. And it's just great for extreme compression. Because again, kind of like the Shadow Hills, it just brings energy. So you start to smash things with it, and they sound fun and musical, and it doesn't. It's an overdone sound, but it doesn't feel like it's too much. It just feels like exactly what you want. It's hard to get a bad sound out of it. It's just a really cool piece of gear.
I think the kind of the feature set on it. It's got a couple of things. This dirt button in and out, which kind of adds a I guess you could call it almost like a crunch type sound to your signal. And I think you have when you play with the drive control, you'll really hear that overemphasized
harmonic distortion.
Yeah, harmonic distortion. And then grab. I think grab. Doesn't it allow the low end to go through and not hit the compressor?
It's a high pass.
Right.
When you put it in, it actually the low end, it grabs the low end, and actually it sounds more compressed because the low end is feeding the side chain.
Right.
Yeah.
With it out, then it's got the high pass,
right,
basically engaging the high pass. So, And then one of the other really great features is it has a blend knob, so it's like a dry wet knob, which is great. So you don't have to have one or the other. You can blend it right here on the unit itself. But
so why don't we play the whole kit and start with the maybe mute the Kiwi and pull down the Lewitt spaced pair for the room mics and blend those up and maybe go a little extreme so we can show what the room mics are adding to the whole kit.
Get my jig here.
So without the room mics, we have definitely mostly close mics. The overheads are about maybe, I haven't been out there in a few minutes, but maybe 2 feet above the highest cymbal. So they're not really distance mics. So right now we have kind of all close mics. So listen as Erik pushes up that spaced pair, you'll really hear the room interact with the rest of the kit, and it'll just kind of come alive and get you a nice sense of space of the room. A little extreme. So yeah, what's great is in the mix, we'll have control over that once all the guitars are in and the vocal, and however live we want the drums to sound, we can push that room mic up, or if we want it to sound more close, we can pull it back. So it really gives us control over the ambience of the kit.
Cool. That's it for drums, right?
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Chet, thanks so much.